Begin and welcome everybody. We're recording this session on Zoom. Hopefully you've been aware of that as you've joined. We have also enabled the live transcript for closed captioning, and you may find that option on the control bar that usually appears at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We extend a warm welcome to this third ASLI Spotlight of 2022 on the topic of Beyond Human. I'm George Handley, co-president of the Association for the Study of Literature and the Environment. And for those of you joining an ASLI event for the first time, we give you a special welcome. We're so glad for you to join us today and invite you to help sustain and further our work by becoming an ASLI member if you're not already a part of that association. I am in Provo, Utah at Brigham Young University, which sits on the ancestral homelands of the Ute, Paiute, and Shoshone peoples. ASLI's leadership launched this new series last year to elevate the work of our members in creative writing, scholarship, public engagement, and more. And we are very excited to continue to foster connections with new public audiences through these spotlights. And I want to give a special thanks to Bridget Barclay and Christy Tidwell, who've worked on making this possible. We'll have time for questions later, and so we'll ask you to use the chat to post your questions. Please try to keep the questions concise, since we only have a few moments together. And let me introduce my co-host, Gisela Jefes, who is my co-president of ASLI. She is a professor of Latin American literature and culture at Rice University with a particular focus on literature, media, and the environment. She's the author of 2 monographs, Las Ciudades Imaginarias en la Literatura Latinoamericana from 2008 and Políticas de la Destrucción, Poéticas de la Preservación, Apuntes para una lectura ecocrítica del medio ambiente en América Latina from 2013. She's the recipient of the LASA Southern Cone Humanities Honorable Mention in 2015. And her most recent publications are the co-edited volumes, The Latin American Ecocultural Reader from 2020 and Pushing Past the Human in Latin American Cinema 2021, the novel Cocodrilos en la Noche from 2020, and the bilingual poetry collection El Cero Móvil de su Boca, the zero mobile of its mouth. Along with me, she serves as the co-president of ASLI. Go ahead, Gisela.
Thank you, George, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm also extending my gratitude to everybody here who has taken the time to attend this wonderful and promising conversation. I'm going to introduce George, who is, as he said, the co-president of ASLI with me. George is professor of interdisciplinary humanities at Brigham Young University, and his creative writing, literary criticism, and civic engagement focus on the intersection between religion, literature, and environment. He's co-editor of Caribbean Literature and Environment and Post-Colonial Ecologies, author of the memoir, Home Waters, a Year of Recompenses on the Provo River, and the recent novel, American Fork, and a co-author of Climate Change Skepticism, a transnational eco-critical analysis. As I said, George is currently co-president with me, and he also serves on the Provo Utah City Council. Well, thank you, everybody. I am very, very delightful to introduce the first presenter, who's going to be Mandy Suzanne Wong. Mandy's first novel, Draft of a Suicide Note, published with Regal House, was a Permafrost Book Prize, Forward Indies, and International Book Award finalist. Her essay collection, Listen, We All Bleed, was an Ecolit Best Environmental Book of 2021. SPD nonfiction bestseller and PEN Galbraith nominee in 2022. 2022 will see the second edition of her award-winning fiction chapbook Awabi with Diggin Press, and 2023, the release of her novel, The Box Grey Wolf Press. And Mandy is going to read from an excerpt from Listen, We All Bleed. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you all so much for having me. I'm really, really grateful to Ashley for inviting me to be part of this. It's amazing. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book and then read a very short excerpt. So Listen, We All Bleed came out in November from New Rivers Press, which is the literary press at Minnesota State University. The book is about radical artists from around the world who use recordings of non-human voices to plead for an end to violence against non-human animals. And the essays are novelistic, personal essays. They listen to fishes, whales, coyotes, elephants, chickens, and more. Central to the work is the importance of listening, just listening as a creative effort that's also an activist act. Listening has tremendous potential as a way of being together while respecting others' otherness and their right to evade our proximity and categories. So the artists in Listen, We All Bleed are anti-anthropocentric. They are determined to resist capitalist norms according to which every extant being is a potential resource. They subvert commercial and traditional aesthetic forms, creating unmusical sound recordings, shamanistic performances, multimedia installations with sculpture, video, interior decorating, and consumer electronics that humans invented to manipulate non-human animals. In all the artworks, the sounds of non-humanity are vital, vivacious actants. So with one exception, which I do not forgive, no animals were coerced or manipulated into participating in any of the artworks I discuss. Instead, the artist's approach was not to approach the animals, but to wait for animals to choose to vocalize in or without the artist's presence. Unlike a picture of an animal, which is always framed by a human, an animal's voice is its selective representation of itself. Whenever you meet an animal, even a human, they choose what to say to you, how to say it, and whether to make a sound at all. So I'd like to briefly just read to you from Listen, We All Bleed about listening to a hydrophonic album called Energy Field by the Norwegian artist Janne Vinderen, and I have hopefully put the album title and her name in the chat. Crackle, crickle, scintillating sonic sparkles in an expanse thrown open above. A glacier's slow dance like distant thunder. A little water gurgling, a lot of water falling. I hear gulping, slurping, creaking, crack, the sound of clicks. Cry, maybe a whistle, far away and close. The liner notes say crustaceans and fishes such as cod, haddock, herring, pollock. Perhaps you didn't know that fishes serenade. It's from Vinderen that I learned sea snails are noisy eaters. I learned the voice of the toadfish. I'm mesmerized by dolphins, echolocation clicks, and that toadfish using his cave as an amplifier. Vinderen set out in search of sounds that humans do not notice or cannot perceive. She records in all this planet's oceans. She recycles her toad and codfishy recordings in multiple artworks because she loves these sounds. To love a sound, care that it happens, that it continue happening somewhere, although we cannot reach it. It's important to realize that things we'll never meet, so different from ourselves that we'll never understand them, are nonetheless alive, because even though they're distant, we coincide with them. We live together with fishes in this now, here on this watery stone, swimming through space. Seeing fishes isn't enough to make humans empathize with them or even acknowledge that they too are living animals. To thrash around in agony with a hook in your mouth, vomiting blood while everybody cheers is awful. Yet many people who enjoy fishing or televised fishing take this apparently screamless thrashing for mechanical winding down. It's when a thing lifts its voice that we know it for a living thing. Only fishes' voices evolve to pass through water, and as we're unequipped to live in water, fishes' songs and screams sound to us like silence. Vinderen wants to change this, make us feel that fishes feel. Sound is a very physical medium, she says. It can come in very close. It brings you right there. Right here in Energy Field, we're steeped in alien life. Listen as it burbles into your head from mouths and claws and sheets of ice, this joy that Vinderen's hydrophones uncover. She says, there is an inherent rhythm in all living, a pulse. If a fish is chewing on something, there is a rhythm. When the sea urchin is filtrating the water, there is a rhythm expressing that animal's perspective on life. To pay attention to oceanic life is to resist ideologies that grind it into chum. All the same, although Vinderden makes art for human ears, the animals, she records, never raised their voices for our sake. Aquatic animals have nothing to say to us except that they're here now, alive. And that alone means a relationship exists between us. Real life, living a hand's breadth from our sewer drains and beyond the last frontier of our understanding. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mandy, Suzanne. We'll now turn to our next author, Megan Kaminsky, who is a poet and essayist and the author of 3 books of poetry, Gentle Women, Deep City, and Desiring Map, Prairie Divination, her collection of essays and oracle deck with artist L. Ann Wheeler, who I believe is with us also today, turns to the plants, animals, and geological features of the prairie as guides for living in good relation to each other. She is an associate professor in English at the University of Kansas and leads community eco-writing and environmental humanities workshops throughout the state of Kansas and beyond through Humanities Kansas and other nonprofit organizations. So we'll turn it over to you, Megan.
Thank you, George, and thank you everyone for having me. I am coming to you today from Arte Studio Ginestrale in Assisi, Italy, so I'm a little bit further on in my day than most of you, I think. And I thought I'd just start out by talking a little bit about what the deck is and our collaborative process with Leslie, who's here also in the audience, and then read you from one of the cards. So that is what I'm going to do. Prairie Divination is an oracle deck and collection of essays that turns to the plants, animals, and geological features of the tallgrass prairie as a source of knowledge and inspiration for how to live in the world, and thinking specifically about how we might realign thinking towards kinship and sustainability. So one of the guiding questions was, how might thinking with plants and animals guide us in navigating an uncertain present and to help imagine futures? So there are cards. Actually, can I get the slide turned off, because I didn't make a slideshow. I just have the title thing. And this, thank you. And this way you can see a little better. So there's the deck of cards and the book of essays. So thinking about collaboration, this really is a project that's steeped in collaboration, came from this place of Leslie and I thinking together and also thinking with plants and animals. I thought I'd just read a little statement talking about that. So, when I first moved to Kansas in the tallgrass prairie 15 years ago, I felt adrift. Having spent the decade before in large cities across 3 continents, I was ready to set roots and find a home. Coming from personal histories of displacement and disconnection from ancestral knowledges, I wasn't really sure what it meant to be from or of a place. So when I moved to Kansas, I returned to the practices of my childhood, which was getting out and exploring. I observed and researched and made friends with plants and animals around me. I also made friends with ethnobotanists, evolutionary biologists, plant restorers, land right activists, traditional knowledge keepers, and other folks who dedicate their lives to being with and learning from our unique ecosystem. I asked lots of questions, I listened to everyone's stories, and I ended up learning so much about the prairie that I felt like I became part of its larger community. So it's from this point of shared knowledge and relations that I began to inhabit my new home differently in ways that I found, it wasn't really my intention, but were really healing for my mind, body, and spirit. And Leslie and I became friends too as this was going on, bonding over our shared love of plants, poetry, and divination practices. And we developed a vision together of a project that could help others connect to place and learn from the more than human persons with which we share a common home. So in charting and sharing our collaborations with the prairie, we hope to share some of the lessons it's taught us and help others build practices towards relation within their own home, whether it be the prairie or somewhere else. So I mentioned being kind of severed from my own family of origin and their ancestral practices. And this kind of pushed me in ways that I thought, I don't know, are really important for the project, to find my own ancestors and really lean into queer and disabled ancestors and community and practices. And that practice and the project itself is really steeped in these practices, thinking about things like chosen family and interdependence as ways to feel and think with the more than human persons of the prairie ecosystem as our teachers, kin, and collaborators in building the worlds we long to inhabit. So that's the collaborative practice. And I like to pull cards before I give presentations and readings. And this is one of my favorites and pretty exciting. And I don't know what's going on, but I keep pulling the wolf. And I love Leslie's drawing here. There we go. I think you can see that. So in the deck, the wolf symbolizes rebirth and revolution. And those of you who've been to Kansas might know that we don't really have wolves right now. So there's an interesting story behind that. And I'm going to just read the entry of the wolf to close us out, or close myself out. Wolf, Canis lupus, rebirth, revolution. Though the Great Plains wolf, Canis lupus nubilis, was declared extinct in 1926, the distant memory and present imagining of wolves as apex predators of the tallgrass prairies offer both a ghost to mourn and hope for a different way of life in the future. The Great Plains wolf territory extended throughout the plains from southern Manitoba and Saskatchewan south to northern Texas. Once abundant through the Great Plains, after the eradication of buffalo by European settlers, they were poisoned, shot, and trapped for their pelts until all were killed. If the genocide of the Great Plains wolf is the product of an exploitative and extractive relationship with our more than human co-dwellers, then the wolf card is an invitation to change that relation. This isn't the only way to live in the world, and there's nothing natural about it. Now is the time to imagine a new world based on values of interdependence, mutuality, and care. How can you change your individual relationships? How can you make space for others to thrive? How might we reconfigure our world to upend the destructive histories and present values of domination that have left a few to benefit at the expense of so many? Gray wolves are returning to parts of the US, many parts of the US, and with the return, scientists have noted dramatic increases in the health and diversity of their home ecosystems. What would it be like to live in right relation with our more than human kin? How might we change our ways of living to make it possible for the wolf to return to the prairie? Imagine the ways in which we all might flourish. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. That was beautiful. We're gonna now hear from Estela Gonzalez. Estela writes in English and Spanish about race, class, gender, and environmental justice. Her fiction has appeared in Barcelona Review, Best of Solstice, Cold Hill, Feminine Rising, Flash Frontier, Latino Book Review, Luvina, and Revista Literatura Mexicana Contemporánea. She teaches Latin American literature and creative writing in Spanish at Middlebury College. Arribara of 2022 was a finalist for the Feminist Press Louis Merriweather Award.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I am greeting you from Dakina, the homeland of the Western Abenaki, which is now called Vermont. And I will be reading two sections of my novel, first the preface and then a little section towards the end. Musnipol y la mar, all because the sea ate the beach. Careyes, hundreds of meters of sand in all directions, warmth of talcum powder between our toes, where we dug ourselves up to our necks, played war, climbed on cliffs, and dove, where we rode the waves, our parents unaware, to where our feet could no longer reach. The sea held and sustained us. The sea was always there. But one day the machines arrived. They drove piles and built walls dressed in hibiscus and bougainvillea. They erected towers, dug pools bluer than the ocean blue. They named Hotel Carelles after the last hawksbill nesting on its beaches. The paradise of delight was open to all who could pay. Everyone smiled and dispersed pictures of the nation's heroes on little papers. And the sea churned. It bellowed its ire at the stone that was not stone, the glued up gravel. It licked the cement. It spat at the walls, spewed insults of seaweed and jellyfish. It rose, ate a centimeter of beach. The next year, one more. Erosion, pronounced the solemn engineers rushing to reinforce the levees. The sea hurled waves. It invaded the lobbies of luxury hotels. Its irate hurricanes inundated the polished floors, stole Persian rugs. When it shattered the windows of jewelry stores, rivers of pearl and coral returned to sea. The wind kidnapped dogs of the laps of distinguished ladies. Such was the clamor of the paradise of Carelles Hotel and Resort. Until one day, exhausted from holding tons of steel and cement, the sand renounced her destiny as blonde Atlas, abandoned herself to the depths, and let the great blue cover her. Under it all, sea and sand remembered that before time was time, she, the enormous, had been alone, round, weeping her blue solitude. The sand's return also saddened Musnipol, the oldest turtle in the world, because in the beginning only she, Laud, had pitied the great blue. Old Musnipol, with 7 lute strings on her leather back, the lone mariner who in the beginning had descended to the depths and murmured distant songs into the great blue's ear. The leatherback promised the sea a companion, firm and joyful. She took a clump of sand and carried it to the surface. She took another clump and another. Clumps created mountains, hills. That is how Mother Musnipol presented the great blue with a warm companion to caress with her waves. She gave us a home where we could walk, climb, dwell. She gave us earth, but we broke her, and earth returned to sea. So that is the preface of the novel. And my work is about a young woman, a Mexican woman who lives in the States, has to go back home for a family emergency. And when she's there, she discovers all kinds of destruction in the natural world. And she tries to do her part to rebuild it through sea turtle conservation projects. And I'm going to read another little piece towards the end of the novel where she and her girlfriend are taking a break from their conservation work. They're swimming in the ocean after the night's work. So they work overnight, and so this is in the early morning. The sky was rosy in the east. We coasted the first cover and swung around the point. And then everything changed. The sea turned dark, as though a cloud had covered the sun, but the cloud was in the water and it enveloped us. Then it pulverized. Every tiny section turned toward the sun and became millions of mirrors. It was a school of fish, a glittering cloud, dense as a net, blanketing us in its nimble progression. I circled Fernanda's waist. Our bodies rubbed gently as we swam with one arm each. Around us, an entourage of shooting stars, eddies upon sparkling eddies, making more, smaller eddies and more. They were showing us the way. We followed them along the coast. I pulled Fernanda gently along. We slowed down and the fish did too. Fernanda came to the surface, took her mask off and yawned. I can't, I'm tired. I'll see you on shore, love. I took my mask off too. I held her and kissed her like the first time. We stopped moving for a moment and we dipped, kissing underwater. Around us, the fish made a circle of light. Then Fernanda swam away and the silver cloud parted, some going with her. As I went around the point, the other cloud followed me. In the ocean, we were always together. I swam through the river of light, and then I caught my breath. There rushed Golfina. Lost in the dance of silver, the turtle flew, her fins like wings, entangling dainty fish in her turbulence. She browsed the coral, unconcerned with the glittering sea or with me. I came up, Fernanda, Golfina. I listened for her. I heard the breeze. With her shining entourage, the turtle coasted toward open sea. One stroke of her graceful fins took her farther than many of my kicks. I raised my face above the water. I called, I swam, I followed Golfina, and the fish followed me. I looked again. Fernanda had to be somewhere. I swam around the boulder into a small valley of sand and grasses surrounded by rocks and coral. The cloud of fish led me to long black strands of seagrass floating from the floor 5 feet below. I dove to reach the source of the caressing strands. The fish parted in whirlpools of light. A scream grew inside me. On the bed of swaying grass, Fernanda rested. Her gaze penetrated my heart. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Estela. That was beautiful. We'll now hear from Boria Sachs, who is the author of many books on animals and human culture, and he teaches in the graduate English program at Mercy College and at Sing Sing Prison. So with that, Boria, go ahead.
I keep forgetting that. Thank you so much. Well, you can see in my background, there's a crow chasing an eagle. And I'll just say that my interest in birds and their relationships with people started with crows. I think that perhaps of any animals, our relationship with crows may be the most reciprocal and the most egalitarian. We hear them, we look up at them, they are constantly watching us unobtrusively, trying to understand us, sometimes to take advantage of us, for example, by placing nuts on the road for our automobiles to crack, by watching when they take out the garbage at the supermarkets. Well, I'm not going to talk more about crows because that's just what started me. And this is about all birds. And I realized, starting with the crows, the multiplicity and the complexity of our relations with birds, with animals, with plants, how these are informed by tradition and constantly evolving and anchoring us in a community of living things. Now, without more ado, I'll read a little bit from the introduction. Understanding birds and their relations with human beings is like accurately describing a single bird seen in a grove. You hear a call and look around until you glimpse it on the branch of a tree. It is in constant motion, turning, hopping, fluttering about, and landing a short distance away. It seems to change color as it goes from full sunlight into a canopy of leaves and back. A description must take into account many views, synthesize them, and then explain why they vary. In a similar way, this book will bring together perspectives drawn from ornithology, graphic arts, history, folklore, literature, and so on. I have also tried to weave together facts, stories, and images in something like the way a bird constructs a nest from twigs, yarn, spider webs, fur, and other materials. My intent in this book is to show how intimately our bonds with birds are bound up in the matrix of ideas, practices, fears, hopes that make up what we call human civilization. The connections are so profound, I will argue that a world without birds would effectively mean the end of humankind, even if we continued to pass on some approximation of our DNA. Birds have had many roles in human society, including omens, food, bearers of messages, disposers of waste, deities, environmental indicators, pets, and models for decorative motifs. Terrestrial and marine animals also tell us a great deal about ourselves, but birds especially reveal what we wish to become. Now, I'll read one more passage, and this is a reference to Plato's allegory of the cave. People who have spent their whole life as prisoners in a cave, placed in such a way that they can only see lights reflected on the cave wall, a bit like our movies. That's all they know. They think that's all there is, until one of them escapes and sees a world above of trees and plants and birds and animals and other people and streams, and goes back to telling them about it, and they don't believe him. Suppose a swiftlet, a small South Asian bird that has adapted to life in caves and, like bats, navigates by echolocation, had entered Plato's cave. The prisoners would have had trouble describing the bird and have been puzzled by the way in which it appeared and left. At first, they might have said that the swiftlet was a hallucination, but the shadow it cast was real. Suppose the swiftlet and her mate built a nest on the cave wall and then laid eggs from which chicks eventually hatched. The swiftlet could have directed the prisoners beyond the bounds of their familiar world, and perhaps even inspired one to escape. To imaginatively project yourself into a bird, you must lay aside your own identity. You must, for a moment, forget who you are and what you know. In anthropomorphizing a bird, thinking of it as essentially human, we confer a false impression of universality on human or culturally specific ways of thinking. In attempting to see the world as a bird does, we begin to activate unconscious intuitions and vestigial senses. This can produce a flurry of intense emotions, such as exaltation, confusion, melancholy, and wonder. Finally, we return to our everyday routines with enhanced appreciation. And that is how I think of Beyond the Human. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was great. I mean, this is so much to say, and it's so beautiful to hear about all these interconnections of these different human and non-human ecosystems, both culturally and biologically. So I'm just gonna start with my question, which is actually two in one. All of you, through your writings and projects, appeal to a need to reconnect with the non-human, either by thinking with, caring for, or listening to. It seems to me that you're inviting the reader to become more active through different strategies. Mandy Suzanne Wong invites us to take on the responsibility to learn to recognize, while Megan Kaminsky and Leslie Ann Wheeler seek to inspire practices that counter extractive and exploitative values and relationships with land and people, humans and otherwise. On the other hand, Estela Gonzalez transports us through her fiction to a situated drama of environmental catastrophe. And Boria Sachs evokes an avian illumination to enable an identification of a person or group of persons with counterparts among birds. Could you all elaborate a little bit on these practices and exercises that can help us, readers, to forge new kinships with a world that goes beyond the human? And how can, in your view, becoming more active as opposed to remaining passive and or paralyzed in seeking to expand our relationships allow us to seize the real dimension on the ongoing crisis?
Well, should I start since I was first? Okay, but that was a great question, actually, a really complicated question. Thank you so much. Listening to others is indeed learning to recognize, but I also want in my work to take that even further by learning to empathize. Recognition is part of the process of empathy. I recognize how you're feeling because I may have felt something similar to myself, but I can't totally rely on that sort of presumption of familiarity when I'm considering the emotions of another species or just another being who is not me. You know, empathy requires like cherishing that difference between myself and others. And it means like honoring the fact that your emotions will never translate absolutely into mine. A fish's emotions may not translate, will not translate perfectly into human psychological categories. And to some extent, empathy requires misunderstanding and therefore like mindful imagination. And thank you for giving this question in advance so I could just quickly pick out the passage that you were referring to from an essay in the book entitled To Dream as You, and it's about a snail who got comfy in a post box and ended up writing out a storm in my house. Empathy is a process and a skill which involves perception, cognition, and emotion. To empathize with you, I must sense that you're in the grip of feeling. I must take the trouble to learn to recognize or imagine what you in particular might feel in your situation. And I must myself feel something. I must let myself be affected by you in your situation. Hearing the storm's wrath and observing that you're no bigger than my fingernail, I may not feel like sliming for the nearest postbox with due haste, but knowing that you're probably in distress distresses me in my own way, compelling me to Google how you might be comforted, in this case with a solid roof and a supply of stale lettuce. Not because I pity you, not out of sympathy, but because your situation, our shared situation, our coincidence distresses me differently than it distresses you, and yet we both share this distress. So it's about appreciating the feelings of another and their potential resonances with my own, but also their necessary differences from me, which make them to some extent unknowable. You know, and I really think that caring about others, you know, really requires cherishing their otherness, their difference, to the point of like Boria Sachs was saying, inviting their perspectives to estrange me from what I thought I knew about myself. Long answer to a really great question. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that's an amazing answer as well. So who wants to go next?
I'll go next if you like.
Yeah, it's up to you, of course.
Okay. I think that moving beyond the human and beyond anthropocentrism is a very profoundly individual thing. It's individual because the world beyond human society is no more homogeneous, in fact, far less so than human society itself. I think we all identify with different forms of life, forms other than the human form, but the ones that we choose or that choose us are very individual. For some people like me, it might be crows. For some, it might be trees. It can be almost anything. And whatever this may be, that can be your starting point. But we're not all starting in the same place or necessarily moving in the same direction.
Thank you. Maria,
Sorry.
Yes, Estela, please.
Yes, I was wondering if I could go next because I think my answer kind of adds to what Boria was saying. And I also very much agree with what Mandy Suzanne said before. But my approach is a bit different. It's not so individual because, well, I think that we are all one. Each of us is one. We are all one, but we are a lot more. And so, you know, we can be one in the ocean. To my experiences with water, as you can see in my reading, but we can be one in the ocean, but we can also be one with the ocean if we have enough humility, you know, the humility of not understanding, the humility of not being able to be completely at ease in the ocean, no matter how warm the water is and how bright and how sunny and how alive it is. So that humility, I think, adds to what people have said already. And then the other thing is, at the same time, we are one with our individual efforts to understand, to participate, to help. But we can also be many, you know, if we are dogged enough, loud enough, insistent enough, visible enough. So this interaction between the one and the many, or the one and the all, to me is key to what we're talking about. Thank you.
And I guess I will jump in as the final respondent. And thank you all for those beautiful answers and the question. Thinking about the Prairie Divination Project and thinking about divination as a practice, I think of it as this practice that's really an invitation. And an invitation to connect with different kinds of knowledges. As someone who teaches at a university, we have data, we have science, and we have all these forms of knowledge that are really important. But when we think about the things that really drive our decisions and our values, they're related maybe to those knowledges, but they come from somewhere else. So I'm really interested in divination as a practice that connects us to knowledges like intuition and embodied knowledge and family and ancestral knowledges and cultural knowledges, and makes space for those knowledges to enter into our understanding and conversations. And that's really kind of where this project came from, because I write poetry and do work in eco-poetics, and I needed that push, that change in genre to move outside of those practices or to expand those practices. And I wanted to invite people into interacting with the natural world, and especially the tallgrass prairie ecosystem. Many of our students, many of my students at the University of Kansas have never been to the tallgrass prairie, even though it's all around them, and they don't realize that it's this very rich and beautiful ecosystem. So part of it was thinking about, I was with my friend's son in Victoria, Australia, and Charlie, I think, was 6 at the time, and he didn't want to get off his Pokemon. And when we were out looking at wombats, I was like, Charlie, what does that wombat remind you of? You know, which Pokemon? And suddenly, like, the whole world to him came alive, and he could have these personal relationships. So maybe that's not the whole story of how we got to the project, but thinking about connecting people with the knowledges in their lives and their interests, and having that be a practice that makes those kinds of things important and places connections and focus.
I just wanted to follow up with a question. First, just a brief comment, you know, thinking about Beyond Human, all of you have really explored the paradox of trying, you know, to get beyond the problems of anthropocentrism. But in the course of doing that, it seems like you're also arguing that human civilization and human tools like the imagination and poetry and art are necessary to building those bridges. And in fact, I think, as Boria put it, you know, our civilization kind of is unimaginable without those beyond human connections. Anyway, I think that's just really fascinating. My question is kind of more practical about your methodologies that led you to produce these particular genres of artistic production that you've done. I mean, I'm, you know, maybe you were this way since you were, you know, since you can remember, but if that's the case, we'd love to hear about that. If that's not the case, and you made a conscious decision to sort of more deliberately attend to the more than human world, how did you do that? And why did that, or how did that end up leading to the particular product that you have created? Maybe we can go in reverse order if you want, Megan, if you're ready to answer that right away.
Sure, I'm happy to. That's a good question. I think I had to return to who I was when I was younger. I think I don't want to speak for everyone in the academy, but I know for a lot of people, the practices of learning and getting to becoming acquainted with these intellectual systems sometimes estranges us from how we entered into the interest in the field in the first place. So for me, I think I was really suspicious of things like divination, and really suspicious in things like, you know, talking about how I love to go on hikes and be out in nature. So, and really was used to intellectualizing those experiences. So I found my way back in this kind of circuitous route, and that's through phenomenology and thinking like post-Heideggerian animal studies, and then getting into plant studies, and then connecting that with traditional environmental knowledges. Robin Wall Kimmerer was a huge influence in this project, and Black feminist thinking. I mean, Adrienne Maree Brown is so important to the work I'm doing. Saidiya Hartman, thinking about ancestors and how we can connect. So there definitely had this kind of that methodology, and then on the side, I was studying with Chani Nicholas like 6 years ago, and was doing this in a way that I was kind of embarrassed and not sharing with my colleagues. Not embarrassed in general, but you know, that's not something you really talk about, especially as the poet in the department who's always kind of the spacey person anyway. So it was connecting all those things together. But yeah.
How about you, Estela?
Well, in my case, I'm a storyteller, right? So that's what I do. I read stories and I write stories and I tell stories, etc. And so for me, it was not really a method. It was where the story came from to write in the novel, and it has to do with serendipity. I mean, I'm from Mexico, and it's a country that of immense beauty, natural beauty, and loves to sell it touristically. So that paradox to me is terrible, because how can that be sustainable, right? But I'm also, contradictory as a human being. So I was doing my tourism in Mexico, and I once I saw a sea turtle hatch in front of us, and not in the perfect conditions that we kind of know that they should have, in the moonlight, in a very secluded beach or in a protected area, as opposed to that it was in a very touristic beach, surrounded by banana boats and etc. And next to restaurants, in the middle of the day, not at night. And so I just, my thought was, first it was joy, like, what an amazing opportunity to be able to see a beautiful creature hatch out of the sand like that, and make it safely to the water. We were elated, my family and I, but also, the lesson behind it, what it is that, if they can make it, if they have that resiliency, if they have that courage and that luck, what can we do to expand that, And so that courage and that resiliency, and then of course I started doing a little research and found out that this was in the 2010s, more or less. I realized that the people who used to hunt sea turtles in Mexico before the ban in 1990 they turned around. I mean, they were unemployed because they couldn't hunt and sell turtle meat anymore, which was a food in Mexico, continues to be a food, unfortunately. So they were unemployed, and they turned around and they started partnering with biologists to protect the turtles, because they have the knowledge of where to find them, how to find them, when, etc., how to fish them out of the water. But now the purpose was not to kill them, but to protect them, to study them, to make census with them, etc., to give them the surgery necessary, etc. And so that turtle, that story of resiliency, financial, economic, social, and the partnering with the ocean that was feeding you, and how can you continue to eat and survive when you cannot kill the animals anymore, and turning around and doing something for them instead. Those are the little snippets of joy and hope that I crave and need in order to not fall into despair. And I am hoping that this can just ignite somebody's heart when they read my story, and to be aware of the dangers that we are facing, but also to find ways that we can be more hopeful and more active and more practical as well. So that's where it's a way of thinking rather than a real methodology in my case.
If you like, I'll go next.
Yes, please.
Well, I've been involved in this for a long time. I was even peripherally involved in ASLI at the beginning, and also in anthrozoology. I think with any tradition and any background, if you explore it deeply enough and long enough, you come to connections with the natural world. But for me, it was pretty hard. My father was a communist, and he was a Russian spy at the Manhattan Project, and that may impress some people as romantic, but it was just unspeakably stressful. And I started out trying to probe that background, certainly not to romanticize it, but not to condemn it unnecessarily either. And this brought me into dissident literature of the time during the Cold War. And honestly, and for about a decade for over a decade, I was a human rights activist, but it became emotionally just too much. Now, I think what really sparked my turn was when I was looking in a used bookstore at some of these old 19th century encyclopedias and books about animals, and they were filled with all of these fantastic tales, about turkeys that somehow flew to the Near East and learned perfect Arabic, and dogs that solved murder mysteries, and indeed, the literature of that time is far less anthropocentric than most people think. But for me, it was just something so profoundly different. And it's opened me up to how varied and how rich and how complex and paradoxical and wonderful our relations with animals and other forms of life can be, even within a profoundly anthropomorphic, anthropocentric society. And from there, I went to more academic kinds of literature and things like bird watching and different ways of exploration. But that is what really inspired me.
Thank you, Boria. We've got just a couple minutes left. I want to make sure Mandy Suzanne has a chance to make any final comments.
Yeah, thank you. I just actually wanted to go quickly back to something you said, George, about this being a paradox, because for me, it all started with the artworks that I listened to for the book. And listening to non-human animals through artworks or empathizing with non-human animals through art and imagination is only a paradox if you think humans are diametrically opposed to non-humans and that non-humans don't imagine and don't have art, but they do. And, they do it in their own ways, in their own languages. We can't always appreciate it as art. The example in the book is humpback whale song. I live in Bermuda, where it was discovered that humpback whales were making sounds, and they're even musical, like in the sense that we consider music. But, to them, to the whales, they do it for no reason. They may do it for some reason. They often do it just because they feel like it. And so, that's an aesthetic practice, and it's a culturally transmitted practice. Generations learn songs from their ancestors, but also from nearby fads, from other whales who are not necessarily their ancestors. So, cultural transmission, aesthetic appreciation and creation and imagination are definitely in play throughout the non-human realm. So I don't really see it as a paradox to come at thinking of them or thinking with them through art, especially since art is our quote unquote useless practice. You can't make very much money with it. It doesn't produce food. It doesn't, it's an excessive, well, Georges Bataille would say art is an excess of society. And to come outside, the needs that society thinks it has, which are usually based on capitalist ideologies anyway, that's how we reach others' perspectives. Yeah. So yeah, for me, it was like coming through, listening to these artworks, like the work of Jana Vinderden and many others. And then like thinking, I'm really a novelist. This was my first essay collection, and I did this nonfiction because I wanted to interview the artists. And but I really came at the writing with and the listening with the instincts of a novelist. So feeling was very much involved in feeling the feelings of someone who is not me and who is not you, the reader, but nonetheless expressing them in a way that you, the reader, come to feel very deeply for the character or whale or snail or whoever I'm talking about. I tried to experiment with that on the assumption that if you can empathize with a person who doesn't even exist, just because I've told you how they're feeling, then you can empathize with an animal who does exist when you hear their voice. And that was my wager there.
Mm. Oh, it's beautiful. I do wish we had more time. Those are such provocative answers, and your pieces all were very inspiring. I know we had, as co-hosts, added advantage of reading a little bit more from the excerpts that you shared with us, but we do hope this helps to get the word out about your excellent work and inspires those who have a chance to hear this presentation. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Gisela, do you want to have the final word?
Sure. Thank you, George. I just want to say thanks again to everyone for being here. Megan, Mandy, Susan, Estela, and Boria. It has been delightful to listening and reading you. And I am looking forward to learning more about your future projects at some point. I also want to say thanks to Bridget and Christy and Amy in some sort of background that is not here right now for putting all this together, and of course all the participants that took the time to attend and listen to all of you. So thank you again, and I hope to continue these conversations in a different potential way. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.